Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to give it another moment as folks come into the room, but please let us know in the chat where you are joining us from. I am joining from finally spring feeling New York City. So great to see you here. And we're going to get started now, but feel free to continue joining. Oh, great. We've got people from Spain. It's a global event, which we love here at Power to Fly. So, welcome to our final event of our Inclusion, Data, and Leadership Redefined series. And we've been hosting that series all throughout February. If you missed our first two previous talks, don't worry. The recordings for both of those can be found on our website. We'll make sure you know where they are. My name is Rob. I am the Director of Events Marketing at PowerToFly, joining you from New York City. And we are delighted that you are spending your Tuesday with us. And we're also really excited to share the results from our What Talent Wants survey. This is one of our flagship initiatives and is helping to share our really helping to shape our programming for the rest of 2025. At over 1,000 folks taking this survey, we actually had nearly twice as many respondents as in 2024. And if you haven't had a chance to check out the full report, which at 550 plus pages has a lot of amazing data, don't worry, because we'll be sure to send you that report after this event, and we'll also work on adding that link to the chat as well so you can download it. But without further ado, let's jump on into our code of conduct, which you can see here. Again, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know what company you might be joining us from, where in the world you are as well. And I did want to point out that the content shared during Power to Fly events is for informational purposes only, does not constitute legal advice. For specific legal guidance, please consult a qualified attorney. And the good news is, if you are a member of SHRM, this event is eligible for SHRM credits. So I'm actually also going to go ahead and pop that SHRM link here into SHRM code into the chat. So feel free to use that. Or if you want to take a screenshot of this page to capture that credit for later, that is great as well. Let me tell you a little bit more about Power to Fly before we start our conversation today. We help organizations attract top talent and retain engaged employees with solutions that simplify recruitment, enhance employee satisfaction, and drive long-term business success. So if you want to hear more, just respond to one of those mini reminder emails we sent you, and we're happy to continue the conversation. Also, here on this next slide, you're going to be able to actually scan a QR code if you want to book a demo with us and talk to a member of our team. So feel free to scan that as well. But without further ado, I want to introduce you to our two subject matter experts that you're going to be hearing from today. First up is Mara Gates, who is our Director of Content Marketing at PowerToFly. For the past 7 years, she's focused on creating inclusive and impactful learning experiences in academic and corporate settings. Her mission is empathetically to educate and empower people to own their professional and leadership journeys. We're going to be hearing a lot about that today. And a little later in the conversation, we're going to hear from our VP of Growth at PowerToFly, Sienna Brown. Her mission is to build a new wave of leadership focused on inclusive and intention in the workplace so that every individual has an equal opportunity to reach their full potential. So I'll be talking to Sienna in just a bit, but without further ado, I want to bring in my amazing colleague Mara to start walking us through the What Talent Wants survey. So Mara, over to you.
Rob, you're so good at your job. I always feel like I'm like on a game show or something when you host. Thank you so much. Yeah, I really just want to start things off by putting us into context. So, this survey is something that we do every year. We've been doing it for the past 5 years, and this has been the biggest turnout that we've seen yet. We've nearly doubled the amount of participants that we had in past years. And so it really gives us a great snapshot of what is happening in the market right now in the world of work. So we, as Rob mentioned, we interviewed over 1,000 professionals. We've over across 20 industries, 50 different countries, from entry level to executive leadership. So we really have a wide range of perspectives to hear from here, which is going to be really valuable. And the stat that I want to start us off with is a little bit sad, a little bit depressing, but no fear because there are solutions, and that's what we're going to be really focusing on later in this chat. So first things first, when we asked folks if they're considering quitting their job in 2025, over half of the respondents said yes. And this is huge. This is the biggest number that we've had in the report's history. 54% of people are considering quitting their job in 2025 for various reasons, some of which we will get into later in this conversation. And then right next to that stat, you'll see the confidence in job security has just dwindled. So in here we have like a little bit of historical data. From 2023, it was 60%, then it moved down to 44% the following year. And this year we're at 37%. So only 37%, 1/3 of employees feel confident in their job security. So not only are folks looking to leave their jobs, they're also not feeling safe or secure in their own job. They feel like there's a potential that they could either be fired or something could happen to their company. And so there's clearly a problem here. There's a disconnect between what employers are doing or trying to do and what employees actually need. And so this survey that we put on really sought out to kind of bridge the gap between those things. So in the report that you'll receive at the end of this chat, we identified 7 main areas for improvement. Today, we're going to talk about 4 of the major ones, and I'll go quickly over the data because obviously once you have the report yourself, you can look a little bit more in depth into the data. But let's go ahead and move on to the first major key that this report discovered. And that is that career growth opportunities and upskillings are absolutely must-haves for employees. So 91% of respondents said that they wanted to see more upskilling opportunities at their jobs. And this is not news to us because in past reports, we've seen very similar information. We are moving into a skills-based world, whether we like it or not. And so skills are huge. And that means that folks are prioritizing skill building in order to, number one, get the jobs that they want, and number two, stay relevant in the jobs that they currently have. So you hear in the little infographic below, you can see that AI literacy, data analysis, networking, these types of skills are really at the top of people's minds. And something that I found interesting is that there's a range of technical people and business skills that people are really demanding. It's not just, just AI or just coding. It's really a good mix of soft skills and hard skills. And this goes right along with career growth opportunities because most people are not satisfied with their company's career pathing process. So without clear career pathing models, companies are really risking losing their top talent to other companies that do have a little bit clearer structured growth paths. So in the next slide, we'll talk about what the solutions here are. What are the actions that you can take to address this problem? Number one is establishing clear, transparent promotion criteria. And this seems very straightforward. I actually think it is straightforward. It's an initiative. It probably will take a little bit of front end work that will really pay off in the long term. So this involves creating a framework that clearly defines the skills, the metrics, and the achievements that are necessary in order to move up into the next level. So you go from associate, in order to go from associate to senior, whatever, you need to have these different skills. And keeping it very transparent and straightforward, not only is it helpful internally to understand who gets a promotion, who doesn't get a promotion, but it also allows the employees to have some sort of agency over their own career growth because it's very clear what they need to do in order to reach their goals. The next step here is to facilitate lateral moves. Sorry, go back, Ria, my bad. To facilitate lateral moves. So a lot of what we heard was that folks aren't necessarily looking to become the CEO of their company, tomorrow. What they want is to gain skills and experience so that they can grow in their careers and learn more. And so one way to encourage this is to open up internal movement opportunities so people can diversify their skill set inside of the company. And that way you're still retaining people. And I also think that it's quite valuable. It's something that happens a lot here at PowerToFly. We have folks, I've moved from one team to another, and I feel like that is a very valuable thing, not only for my career, but for the company as well, because they're bringing a certain set of experience into that new role. And lastly, I recommend conducting a skills audit because you don't know what skills your team has until you figure that out. It's just, we can easily pinpoint, say, hey, this person has this skill, this person has this skill. But until we actually sit down and perform a skills audit, then we can identify the skills that we have, which allows us to identify the skills that we need to have and then find ways to bridge that gap. So those are all of the ways to address our first problem. And now we're going to move into the major key number 2 that this report revealed. And it is a really interesting one from my point of view because it's about company values driving retention. So all of us here and all of us watching the recordings, no matter how senior we are, we have VPs and CEOs in the room right now, but all of us are employees at the end of the day. So we can all relate to this. When you think about why you're staying at your job, I think everybody will agree that the amount of money they're receiving for the work they're doing is going to by far be the main reason, motivation for staying. And so that is something that we saw wholeheartedly in this report. Everybody saying, okay, salary is the primary motive for staying. However, we saw that alignment with personal values is increasing considerably compared to past years. So 93% of respondents would be willing to quit their current job for another one that is more closely aligned with their personal values. So that's telling me that employees are looking for more than just a paycheck. They really want a sense of purpose. So let's take a look at how we can do that in the next slide. So this really involves a lot of internal intentionality work. This is really it's how we talk about the work that we're doing. So every one of our companies or every one of the companies that are represented here has a mission or a set of values, but how we communicate those values and how we allow our employees to feel like they're contributing to that is major. And so one thing that you can do is to find a way to align employee duties with the organization's values. And this is something that we do at PowerToFly, whether you're a salesperson selling something on the marketing team, creating a marketing campaign, or creating a course for Power Up, our online leadership development platform. Everything that we do is rooted in our mission. And all of the products that you see, all of the solutions that are there for a purpose. And we're able to tie in all of our actions towards that greater goal, our greater mission. And also you can show how employees' contributions are relating to those bigger goals. So it helps them feel like they're really contributing to the bigger picture. And lastly, I really recommend involving employees in creating those values, because when you ask them what's important to them, what drives them, what their why is, they're going to be even more motivated to work towards that goal. So feel free to ask them for their opinions on how to continue to develop and modify company values to better align with what they're looking for. And let's go to the next slide. Major key number 3. This is all about leadership gaps. This is another quite shocking one for me. Um, so something that we learned is that there's an issue with leadership. And this is not surprising because of just what happened in the market in the past, let's say 5 to 10 years. Market was booming, hiring was booming. We had a great job market. The economy was awesome. COVID happened and the economy went down. We saw numerous waves of layoffs, and that made it so that people who were traditionally maybe really great senior individual contributors got thrust into leadership roles. So over 80% of leaders, current leaders, are were put into their role without any leadership training or official leadership training path, which is not exactly comforting. So something that we learned from this report is that people can recognize that their leaders' technical skills are on point. So sales leaders are great salespeople. Engineering leaders are awesome engineers. But there is a disconnect because there's a difference between managers and leaders. And we're seeing that only 36% of respondents are satisfied with their leaders' abilities to support their career growth and motivate their teams, which is really what a leader is meant to do. And this is a problem. So how do we address that? Let's check it out in the next slide. So, I mean, there's a number of ways to go about this. I think leadership development training as a whole is going to be really helpful. But for a quick win, emotional intelligence training or courses or whatever is going to be a great way to empower leaders to get started on their leadership journey, or I should say managers get started on their leadership journey. Because when you have empathy and you're able to see yourself and your emotions and how other people react, you can identify team dynamics and try to create a team experience that's cohesive and motivational for folks. And so we have these courses. We have Power Up. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's shameless plug. It is our learning and development platform, and we use it both internally and as a product externally. And our clients who have taken our emotional intelligence training have consistently raved about that being one of the courses, the most actionable courses. So when you finish with this course, you have a set of skills that you can apply immediately to improve your leadership experience. And so it doesn't have to be with PowerToFly, but I think any sort of emotional intelligence training is a great way to get started on that leadership development journey. And then another way is to encourage feedback loops. They're the best way to understand how people are feeling is simply to ask them. And so you can do this by, conducting surveys or one-on-one meetings to understand where the areas are that you need to improve and what you're doing really well in order to continue to bridge that gap. And I'll shut up pretty soon. We have one more major key, which is job search frustrations and barriers are becoming increasingly common. You all probably won't be surprised to hear that a majority of the respondents have been ghosted in their hiring process and have reported spotting fake job descriptions. But it doesn't stop there. Actually, once they're inside of the hiring process, they felt, or a large percentage of people have felt that the degrees are being used excessively as criteria and their transferable skills weren't being regarded as highly as, perhaps a degree or certification. And this really demonstrates the disconnect between job descriptions and the reality of employment, because transferable skills and diverse experiences are really more important in the workplace. Like if you can do the job, that's more important than you having a certificate saying you can do the job. And so we need to be better about focusing on skills and kind of easing the job search for folks rather than complicating it. So let's talk about how we can do that. And these are three very, very simple, quick wins. Number one is refining job descriptions. So, to avoid confusion, simply just say exactly what the job is, what the responsibilities are, and what the must-haves are. What are the absolute necessary things that this person needs to be able to do in order to be successful in this role? And if there are any nice to haves, label them as such so people feel empowered to take on or apply to this role, even if they might not fit 100% of the requirements. Next is to gather feedback during the entire hiring process. So from interviews to the group interview to a case study, whatever, you need to understand how people are feeling throughout that entire process so that you can pinpoint areas for improvement. And so maybe you notice that during group interviews, many of the people have feedback that they're really cumbersome and scary. So you can then decide ways to address that specific pain point in order to improve the entire process along the way, which will improve the candidate experience, their overall impression of your company, and hopefully their transition into being an employee at your company. And then lastly, simplify evaluation criteria. So this is really talking about instead of having different questions for people, it's really easy to do in interviews when you're talking with people. You get caught up on a subject and you ask questions that are specific to this person. But the best way to go about interviews is to really standardize the questions that you're asking so that you're measuring everybody against the same criteria, focused on skills in order to assess the candidate instead of focusing on their personality or all of the things that you had in common with them. So these are just a few ways to ease some of the frustration around the job search. And before we get into questions, you go to the next slide. I'm just going to quickly recap the issues so that we can talk about some solutions with Sienna. So the main issues here are that professionals are quitting their jobs, they're looking to quit their jobs, and they're also not feeling secure in their own jobs, which is probably why they're looking to quit them. The reasons why is because they don't have upskilling opportunities in their company. Their company values don't align with what they feel is important. They don't have a supportive leader or manager that's supporting their career growth, and or the job search process is cumbersome and frustrating for them. So shameless plug, once again, we will give you the link to download the full report whenever you're ready, but it's full of amazing data and information and also actionable tips to address some of these issues. And so we'll make sure that you get the link to that. And without further ado, I will pass it back to Rob and Sienna for the question.
Thank you so much, Mara. And it was so many great notes. And of course, we're going to be sending out the recording of everything that we're discussing today. So if there was something you want to revisit, don't worry. You're going to get that recording. And then, of course, you can dive deeper into that 50-page plus report. But what I love about this, Mara, is that I attend a lot of our job fairs that we host every month. And so many of these issues I have heard from people during these events, especially some of the things around job search frustrations. So it's great to take that kind of anecdotal words that we hear from people in these events and then put these actual data, these actual numbers into it, because that's what this whole event is about, having that data-driven process that we can take a look at. So thank you so much for walking us through everything.
Thanks for
Wonderful.
having me.
Well, we're going to bring in our other subject matter expert today, our VP of Growth here at PowerToFly, Sienna Brown, who's going to go a little deeper into some of these topics. So thank you again for being here, Sienna.
Thank you, Robin. Before we kick off, I just want to invite all of you who are attending live. Please feel free to turn on your cameras. Please feel free, as we're talking through some of the data or some of the points, if you have questions, drop them in the chat because we want to make this an intimate and exclusive experience for you all to also be able to talk about some of the solutions and needs that you have in your organization in regards to how to support the people that are in your orgs and how to not just learn what talent want, but then also learn how to provide some of those solutions.
Yes, if you have questions based on anything that Mara shared or that Sienna is going to discuss, feel free to add that into the chat. But I do have some questions that folks submitted when they registered, so I'm going to kick off with those. But again, feel free to add, or if there's just a comment, I'd love to hear from you. But my first question, this is pretty much the hot topic right now, Sienna, that everyone's kind of discussing. You and I actually did another event kind of focusing on this, but first off, all this information is great, but how can organizations use this and then also to create those inclusive environments that support diverse teams, but that are also meeting federal requirements? This kind of labyrinth that we're all walking through right now.
Yeah, this is a great question, Rob. And again, I want to invite all of you to, we can share the chat afterwards, but to watch the event that we hosted last week. But I think something that we're really seeing specifically in regards to how our organizations still being able to be inclusive and recognize the expansiveness of diversity, I think DEI has been something that is targeted as three letters without actually diving into the definition of it. So I want to ask really quickly, how many of us in this room are left-handed? You can just raise your hand. Okay, so out of the individuals that we have in this room, we apparently have no left-handed individuals. We have one. Thank you for sharing, Ursa. So something as specific as that also means that Ursa is diverse in a different way than many of us are. And so I just love using that example in a lot of the trainings that we do because it shows just the wide range of what that is. But while that's true, something that we're also seeing is that DEI specifically over the last 5 years has been something that has been siloed or isolated, which is now being impacted. And so something that we've really been working on is how to move past just having DEI be a standalone program or initiative or department and really thinking about in alignment with compliance, how are you integrating inclusive practices into everything that you do, into leadership accountability, into the hiring practices that Mara was speaking about, and most importantly, into the everyday workplace culture. And something that we saw in the respondents from our employees something that we saw in the respondents of our survey is that they also align inclusivity with the concepts of career growth, flexibility, not just skills-based hiring, but also skills-based promotion. Bear with me, but really thinking about how are we creating opportunities for folks across the board. And the other thing that I would think about is also when we're thinking about career growth and those opportunities, we saw that only 24.5% of employees felt secure in their career pathing. And so really being able to start looking at the data of how you, at your organization, number one, define inclusion, number two, define career growth and or success, and then starting to look and make sure that you are creating the structure and the strategy within the organization that allows for equal access for all, right? So when we're thinking about inclusion, being able to say, okay, well, am I only giving promotions to the people who are the loudest in the room or the quickest to reply on Slack? Or are we creating equal opportunities so that a variety of individuals, no matter their diverse background, skill set, or role, have an opportunity to be able to grow within their career and in turn stay in your organization for more time and help the organization reach the business objectives that they're trying to get to. And the last thing that I would say, and I always come back to this, but psychological safety and belonging. Everyone wants to work at an organization where they feel like they belong, where they feel like they have an opportunity to fail and fail fast without major repercussions, to be able to say to their manager or leader, hey, I need to take an hour off to go to a doctor's appointment, or better yet, not even have to ask, right? But thinking about how our leaders and organizations building trust through transparent communication, through giving individuals the resources that they need to thrive. And then also through holding a sentiment of accountability, of really being able to help train leaders, middle managers, and even individual contributors on core concepts like cross-cultural communication, empathy, active listening, and how can we also advocate for others in the workplace as well?
Thank you so much. So much great information there. And I think the aspects about psychological safety as well as the aspects around flexibility are so key, reflected in our survey and also reflected in other surveys as well. Because one other survey, I believe by remote.com or some other folks, were saying 8 out of 10 companies are going to be investing in wellness. And I'm including psychological safety under that as well. So I think that's so key. And so much of what you were mentioning, Sienna, is focused on retention. So what are some effective ways to retain talent in these areas, this era of rapid change?
Change. Quick raise of hands. How many of us have been knowing change recently in the past 3 to 5 years? Right. I think change is something that has been happening at such a quick scale, but then also in so many different aspects. And so something that we're seeing is obviously burnout from employees in regards to having to navigate that change. Also burnout from an individual point of view. Rob had just mentioned wellness and centering more of wellness of saying, can I come to work and do my best work if I'm exhausted from news cycles, if I'm feeling unsure about job security, like how we saw in the survey? And so there's three things I want to touch on in regards to with all of the rapid change that exists, how can we retain talent? And it keeps coming back to professional development and creating a path for individuals to actually stay at your organization and not start searching outside of it. So we saw in this survey that 91% of the professionals that we surveyed wanted upskilling, right? And I think upskilling has become this trendy term of, I want to upskill, get a certificate, take a course. But in reality, what that means is, how am I able to grow, not just in my role, but also tie that growth? What is a bigger impact that that has in the organization, right? And again, that goes back to how can someone see themselves within their team, their organization in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, because many of us probably know that when we have very high attrition rates, that actually leads to spending more money, spending more team time and onboarding and so much more. And so really thinking about what does professional growth look like, but then also going back to the active listening, understanding what that means for each individual, right? And we'll talk about this later, but it can't be a one size fits all type professional growth plan, but really being able to understand what are the skills and desires for the individuals on my team and within the organization. Another thing that we saw in this survey was that over 53% of the participants prioritized flexible work over other benefits. And that was really a key driver of retention. So I used the example before of, hey, can I take an hour to go for a walk my dog, go pick up my kids, whatever that, go to therapy, right? Whatever that might be, being able to have that sentiment of flexibility, of not having to feel as if individuals need to clock in. And I've seen this in real life, someone having their laptop with them and just touching the mouse pad. So it shows that they're online, but then doing something completely different. So when we have or create cultures that focus on you need to be at your desk from 9 to 5, but people aren't actually engaged, it has a negative impact versus being able to say, how can we integrate best practices that focus flexibility and also that don't have a negative impact? Which means if someone has a Slack message up, we use Slack internally, which is why I'm referencing that tool. But if someone has a Slack message up, like at the doctor's, be back at 3 p.m., they aren't then reprimanded for that. But going back to that sentiment of creating a culture where that's welcomed and then also understood how that might change across different individuals' needs. And the last thing that I'll share, I'm just time checking myself, but the last thing that I'll share is, how are we aligning work with purpose? And so Mara had shared this before as well, but I want to tie back to 93% of employees would leave their current job for a job where they felt like the values at the company were more aligned. That has nothing to do with pay. That has nothing to do with career growth, but it has to do with, how do individuals feel when they work at that organization? And so something I would say for all of us is to really think, okay, well, we might be looking at our organizational values, but also how can you create values and the ways of working within your department, within your team, with your collaborators to really be able to align their work with purpose, but then also having the connection of how does what you do in the day to day actually make a difference to our departmental goals, to our cross-departmental goals, to our organizational goals, because oftentimes, and this goes back to Rob's original question, talking about an era of rapid change, we're often moving so quickly that we don't actually take the time to recognize and bring it back to the bigger picture, which leads to that lack of oh my goodness, which leads to that misalignment in regards to feeling as if work is aligned with purpose.
Thank you so much. Again, so many great things in there. And one thing I've heard over and over again from our talent community in terms of upskilling is people say, if I work for a company, maybe in a few years, I want to do something else at that company. I'm in sales, but then I want to go into tech. So, like having those internal upskilling things there, or I'm in sales, I want to stay in sales, but I really need those AI skills to take myself. I need those technical skills. So, I love all this. And one thing I wanted to also ask you about, Sienna, is mentorship and advocacy sponsorship. So only 36% of the respondents to our survey feel supported by their leaders in career development. So what can leaders do better in terms of mentorship advocacy for their employees' growth?
I think this is such a great question, and I'm sure we've all heard at some point, how can we have a seat at the table, right? That might also be how can we create and or build our own table. When I think about the role of leaders, it's really not just to be able to say, how are you owning your role and your work and your KPIs, but how are you also creating more opportunities to create more leaders within your team, right? And so the first thing that I would say for all of you is really a mindset shift as well, right? Shifting from just being a manager and tracking goals and KPIs and initiatives to also becoming an advocate, which means that a lot of leaders are in rooms that their direct reports or their employees might not be in. How are you highlighting their work or their contributions? How are you creating space for them to be able to really show the impact that they're having outside of just what you share in your role? And so when we think about this and shifting to being an advocate, it means how are you advocating for promotions and career growth? How are you advocating for more internal opportunities, like what Rob was just mentioning, for people to be able to take on assignments that are outside of their role, but that are aligned with their desires for career growth, right? And thinking about it as how are you not just providing guidance, but actually providing an opportunity to create more opportunities. The other thing that I would say is having a personalized career roadmap. And this is something that practicing what we preach, right? Internally at PowerToFly, Mara had mentioned this before, but we've created a skills audit. And that skills audit is essentially a way for individuals and then within their teams to be able to identify what are the technical, people, and business skills that I currently have and that I'm also looking to grow. And I think something that's really important is many times as leaders, we assume what other individuals' skills are versus hearing directly from them. Thinking about when we're doing performance reviews, when we're having quarterly check-ins. And so it's almost about how are you creating that space to have skills be a part of a conversation, to also understand where might we be missing an opportunity, right? So if Rob, and I always pick on Rob because we're chit-chatting over here, but if Rob has a ton of skills in data analysis, but that's not a core part of his role, or if I don't ask to be able to hear about things that he's been doing on the back end, then I would never know, which means that I can't advocate for him to take on maybe a new opportunity in a data analyst role in another department. And so that really goes back to the active listening part as well, of actually taking the time to understand individual skills and also where their desires for growth are. And the last thing that I'll say just to round out this question is balancing almost autonomy and mentorship, right? And I think something that's really important specifically for leaders, right? Rob was saying only 36% of respondents felt supported by their leaders. I think in the same way that people talk about leaders, they also talk about micromanagers or people who silence them or some of more of the negative traits. And so thinking about how are you creating opportunities for each and every individual within your team to thrive, right? How are you being clear on what expectations are, but not just creating high or ambitious expectations, but actually giving structured guidance. So if I'll use a real life example, I and my team might laugh because they're on this call, but I have a very high expectation in regards to data analysis. And so it would be one thing for me to say, here's my expectation on data analysis. Now go do it with no guidance versus saying, let me roll up my sleeves and let's talk about the framework, the structure, the things that we need to then be able to help other individuals grow. It's top of mind as we had a meeting on data today. But I think again, it's a real life example of how are you not just as a leader, as a manager, creating expectations for others to be able to fit, but actually teaching individuals how to fish and then allowing them to go and fish as well. Go ahead, Rob.
Well, that leads perfectly into my next question for you, the autonomy aspect, which is how can organizations balance offering structured learning programs? And Mara was talking about the structured learning program we here have at PowerToFly. Those structured learning programs while allowing employees to tailor their upskilling journey to their career goals. Because one thing I think we've all learned is most people do not like that mandatory meeting of like, we're gonna all learn about this together, and you're like, just, oh, okay. Like people want to have that customized to what they need. So how can you balance that? Because there's certain things that probably everybody needs, but then people want certain skills. So it's a fine line there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, who enjoys being in a training that's not interesting to them, right? And I think that that's something that's so important to think about because it's not a one size fits all, right? What Stephanie might be interested in, or Megan, I'm choosing y'all who are in the room, Clemmy and Morgan, they might look very different. And so obviously this puts us in a space where we say, well, we can't create individualized training programs for everyone within the organization. But something that we've seen that's really worked best with the organizations that we partner with is really being able to say, here are some of the core buckets and options that we have. Go survey your individuals. What is it that they want to learn outside of these options that we know will drive results? And then we can come back and create a specific learning path that will be able to help them reach their goals. And actually, what we've been able to see is going through that type of process, it's not just attaching what we think or what we know will have the best impact with what individuals need, but they're more invested. They have higher buy-in with their organization. They have increased sentiments of belonging. And not only that, but they actually care about what they're learning, which shows that that knowledge retention, that percentage is even higher after those trainings. And so I'll simplify what I just said by saying being able to provide different learning paths and then let individuals choose. I think something else where a lot of organizations can think about what this looks like holistically is providing both technical people and business skills when we're thinking about training. And again, this is a framework that we've created here at PowerToFly when thinking about what is the trifecta of what every employee from individual contributor to C-suite needs. It's being able to have the people, the business, and the technical skills. And so, yes, things like AI literacy and data skills are in demand, but so is communication, so is empathy, so is change management. And so, really thinking about again, what are the different aspects that are needed most within your organizations, and then being able to make sure that you create a little bit of a learning journey that gets people engaged and tying it to that bigger picture. And the last thing that I'll say, which I think is extremely important as well, is making learning flexible and accessible. Maybe everyone can't join a 3-hour training session on a Friday afternoon, right? Maybe people might need to be able to take on-demand trainings. People might be able to not just have it be with video, but also being able to have supplementary documents to really integrate what they're learning. And so I always go back to, again, asking individuals what they need to serve them, so that you can make sure that the training programs that you do have the most impact for your organization. And the last thing I would say, sorry, but
No.
the last thing I would say is also not make it a one-off thing, right? Because I think that
Mm-mm.
that's something that we were talking about at the beginning. So not making learning and development feel like it's something that happens on a quarterly or a monthly basis, but how can you integrate some of those things into the day-to-day ways that you work on your teams and in your organizations as well?
I love that. And our colleague Marcella just put into the chat there 49% of the survey respondents struggled with uncertainty about skill requirements for new roles, fear of rejection, or self-doubt. One of the reasons why we actually have a skill quiz here at Power to Fly that people can actually take to help identify what are those missing skills there. And speaking of those skills, my last question for you, Sienna, before we start to wrap up here, is what are some overlooked but highly impactful skills that professionals and organizations should be focusing on for career advancement and retention?
Yeah, this is a great question, Rob. And then what I'm also going to do is in the chat for all of you who are saying, this sounds great, but how can I actually learn the skills, go through the process? I just dropped the link for Skill Meter, which is one of our resources that we use for individuals within our organization to really be able to look at what are those skills that they have and where do they need to be growing. And going back to some of the things that we've seen, not just in individuals using this process in Skill Meter, but also within the survey is, I would say, three different things. And the top one is empathy and emotional intelligence, right? How are you really being able to understand and practice the ability to actively listen, the ability to build relationships, the ability to really be able to focus, especially as a leader and for a career advancement, excuse me, really being able to understand who is the person that I have in front of me? What do they value? How am I able to then shape and craft my story to be able to get quicker buy-in and to be able to move forward even faster? The second thing that I would say, and we spoke about this a little bit earlier in the event, and yeah, a little bit, it's almost 8 o'clock at night, so my brain is tweaking out, but a little bit earlier in the event, something that we were talking about was change management. With so much rapid change, especially in organizations, how are you almost fostering the skill bear with me, how are you almost fostering the skill by doing it yourself, but then also by sharing best practices on change management so that it becomes a part of the culture, right? And you're able to consider, okay, we need to make X change in the next month. How are we preparing the team? How are we giving insight with proactivity? How are we being able to get the buy-in from all the necessary decision makers? And once individuals, departments, and companies start learning about and practicing change management, it makes so much more of a difference in regards to the day-to-day and also reaching the business objectives. And the last thing that I would say is strategic thinking, but not just strategic thinking and influence, right? Many employees want leaders who will drive impact, but that also means how are you able to have influence? And I think this is really important, not just for leaders with certain titles or with certain roles, but I think for every employee to be able to understand how am I getting great at data-driven storytelling to be able to prove my point? How am I getting great at being able to give clear, effective communication in my presentations? How am I able to think strategically, but then also, when I do have a seat at the table, be able to advocate, to be able to move forward with what it is that they need? And I think with a little bit of, those are my three suggestions for things that I think are often overlooked, but are actually really important, specifically in the people and the business skills development that will allow for any employee to be able to go further much faster.
Yeah, we just hosted a leadership forum, leadership roundtable last week, and I was actually very surprised that empathy, EQ, these were topics that kept coming up. So very much, I think, at in the line, top of mind for many leaders. And I think all of this is to say what we've said earlier. we have this survey here, which is kind of a guiding light, but then you can reach out to your own teams, get that feedback, survey them. What do they want to see? What are the skills that they want to develop? So thank you so much, Sienna, for all of these amazing insights here. And if people are interested in the Skills Gap quiz, my Marcella just dropped that in there as well. So thank you, Sienna, and thank you to Mara for all of that great insight as well. We will be sending out the recording of this event as well as the What Talent Wants survey, so you can check that all out. But before I let you go, for everyone watching live and for watching the recording, I'd love for you to kind of just think as you go about the rest of your day, what is one thing that you are taking away from this conversation? So that might be that one action step, that one upskilling item that you want to take back to your team. Maybe it's not a big thing, maybe it's a small thing, maybe it's something you can even get done this week. But what is that one thing that you're taking away from your conversation? So as you stop watching this recording or leave this live event, keep that at the top of your mind. And lastly, I just want to let you all know that PowerToFly is here to be your partner in all things recruitment and retention of those engaged professionals out there. So if you are interested in finding out more or scheduling a demo with us, you can scan that QR code on your screen right here. Again, feel free to reach out to to the reminder emails as well if you want to book a call or if you have any follow-up on anything that we shared with you today. We are happy to provide that. And last but not least, check those inboxes later this week for recording again of today and for what the What Talent Wants survey if you haven't already downloaded that. But without further ado, we'll wrap up here today. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you joined us at our other events this February on diving into some of these leadership gaps and inclusion issues, we are very happy that you were spending a little bit of time with us. So until next time, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.